everyone, welcome to Cohesion's fourth and final webinar in our four-part intro webinar series. Today, we're excited to discuss what data can do for real estate and how it can be leveraged to not only make buildings better, but to make the world healthier, greener, and more efficient. My name is Jessica Criollo, and I work on our marketing efforts here at Cohesion. Joining us today is our CEO and co-founder of Cohesion, Thru Shivakumar, and Justin Daab, our Chief Product Officer. Both Thru and Justin have unique perspectives on the value of data in real estate. They bring many years of experience across both real estate and other industries that I know they will bring a compelling assessment of why the largest industry in the world is lagging behind when it comes to transformation and the exciting path ahead of us. Let me turn it over to Thru to get us started.
Great, thanks, Jessica. Hi, everyone. I'm so excited to be here and with all of you today. I'm especially excited to be able to do this webinar with my partner who just started this week, Justin Daab. I met Justin over a year ago as his company at the time did our company branding work. He helped us position our company back then, and now he joins us to create, develop, and position our products. Justin, welcome to the team, and thanks for doing this webinar with me on your fourth day at Cohesion.
Thank you, Thru. Thank you so much. I really believe in the work that Cohesion is doing. It's really important. And the vision around what we can do with data really is the reason I'm so passionate about joining and leading the valuable product work at the company. So I watched the first three webinars before I started, and you know, I really enjoyed how we looked at the benefits of the Cohesion platform in improving indoor air quality, in integrating digital technologies to enhance the tenant experience, and using our digital twin to unlock the value of commercial properties. Well, there's certainly a wow factor in each of these. There are also some macroeconomic factors that are really driving this development and adoption. Could you talk a little bit about how those economic elements are aligning to incentivize healthier, greener building tech adoption?
Absolutely. So as you mentioned and alluded to, there are three macroeconomic factors affecting that are kind of colliding right now in the market. First is that because of the pandemic, healthy buildings have become a focus for building occupants. This is specifically related to the air people breathe and the surfaces they touch or don't touch. You know, the focus on what people, you know, how people think about space and utilize space is really just different now because of the pandemic. And while air quality has been a focus in the past before, it's now even a bigger focus today. The second kind of fundamental is that, and this again is not news to all of you, but I think when I say it all together, it's whoa, everything is happening with commercial real estate. But the second is that workplaces need to be flexible to accommodate the new hybrid workforce. We're seeing that, you know, people announced return to office in September, and then all of a sudden the Delta variant became kind of, you know, rampant again. And so the flexibility around people returning to office is very, very key right now. And, you know, in a recent study that PwC did, they kind of recognized that 87% of companies intend to return back to the office in some capacity. And when I say office, I mean the physical office. But it will be in a hybrid way. People will either come in anywhere between 1 and 5 days or not at all. And what that means is that the building is constantly being challenged by having to adapt to this new normal, right? What is new normal going to look like? Is that going to be, are we going to come back and the pendulum's going to swing back to where we were before, which is really, you know, maybe some flexibility of 1 day at home. We don't fully know. We do know that there is going to be flexibility. And, you know, the last really fundamental that's happening is, again, not a surprise to anyone. It's that we are now, we being commercial buildings are part of phase 1 of the climate accord. And we need to make concerted efforts to reduce carbon footprint. And that really is the use of energy and reducing the energy use overall. All three of these provide an opportunity to improve the experience within buildings, but all three of these also are putting pressure on landlords and owners to essentially reduce the costs within buildings, to reduce the costs that they're going to have to spend on these technology adoption factors. So buildings are under a lot of pressure today to really understand how to factor in these three fundamentals.
Oh, great. So you mentioned, you know, green buildings, and I really want to like lean into that a little bit. It really feels like in business and in commercial real estate specifically, we've moved past this thinking that sustainability practices are a nice to have. Um, how does a technology platform help support sustainability initiatives and really create a healthier environment? Can it make that much of a difference?
Absolutely. So really what we're seeing is that, I think we have to take a step back and talk about what is the technology life cycle and how does it apply here to real estate as an industry. So first, what we talk about is that, we talk about there we go. Sorry, my slides weren't clicking. And we talk about where we are as an industry, which is smart, being connected in systems. And the opportunity is that, on the curve, technology becomes a commodity. We are not there yet. But where we are is that, in a building, we go to connecting devices. So things start with connection, and that's connected from a Wi-Fi perspective, connected in terms of gathering data. And that's really all we do. There's separate devices that are disparate. When we get to the next level of growth from a technology perspective, we're looking at, and obviously these can switch around, but we're looking at healthy buildings as a focus area. And healthy buildings can be that, we're collecting data off a sensor, so leveraging an IoT platform. And what we're looking at is, the pollutant levels from a data perspective. We're looking at how people are using space from an occupancy perspective. We're trying to understand what is the environment of the space. And then what we could do is bring that data together, right, from both an occupancy perspective, so the human factor with the systems and environmental factors, bring it together in an intelligent building space. So that means that we're converging two different sets of data to understand patterns and understand what's happening. And based on those patterns, what we could then do is get to a smarter way of operating it that gives tools, automated tools, to get to, an autonomous building, meaning that what we could see, what we could help do is actually optimize systems in real time. So if we understand from a healthy building perspective, we're monitoring first, right? Monitoring the pollutants. From an intelligent building perspective, we're bringing in different levels of data. So now we're understanding, again, the indoor air quality, plus how and when people are using space and if they're using space, and also understanding the device settings of, building systems. And then from an autonomous perspective, then we're actually doing everything in real time. We're predicting that on Fridays at 9 a.m., conference rooms are pretty booked up. So we have to start increasing airflow into the space. So we proactively do things versus reactively.
So really, it sounds like you are talking about a building that is adapting to the human experience in real time. Sounds a little bit like some of the connected devices I have at home now, like my Nest, right? Knows when I'm home and adjusts the temperature a little bit. I have smart locks, or like when I use my smart speaker to control the lighting. So does that qualify at the level of smart?
I'm smiling because I think that a connected home it's an interesting reference point because all of us can really relate to that. We have probably some smart devices at home, and very few people actually connect their home in entirety. But what we could do is step back as to what, looking at the devices. Let's just take, like you said, your Alexa or your Nest. Those are largely dependent. They can become smart over time, but voice commands and scheduling on an app are not necessarily smart. They're connected and can all be controlled through a single device, your phone or your mobile device or your computer. But what makes it smart is the collection of data and the learning aspect of all of the behaviors, and then taking those and interoperating things together. So what I mean, I think it's best to talk through an example, right? What would actually make a smart home really, truly smart and intelligent, right? Not just connected. Because a Nest connects your HVAC equipment, your lighting controls, like if you have a Lutron system that connects your lights, right? And you can voice command to it. but it's not like your lighting system on its own can say, I know Justin's walking in the door, or sensing that Justin is, 2 miles away, so we should start getting the environment comfortable, or predict that you're going to come home at this time. That's not what these systems do. So let's talk about kind of a full use case of a smart home. So let's just say I leave my house with no keys in hand, and I get into my garage and I turn on my car. Leaving my house triggers my smart locks to lock. So I've, again, no keys in hand. And all of that's pulling off from my location on my phone, either through a geofence, your other location-based services aspect. And then once I leave the garage door closes behind. I don't touch a button to close the garage because it senses that my car is 10 feet from the entrance. Leaving the premise of the house then, within whatever geofence I set up, triggers my alarm system to set and turn on. And then my air conditioning goes into eco mode or turns off. It also shuts off any lights that I accidentally left on. Now that is a smart experience because all of the systems are talking to one another and interoperating, right? So let's kind of take the reverse, right? I usually, come home by 5:30. I really don't, but let's just, for purposes of this example, let's say I come home from work at 5:30. And my smart home knows that that's usually the pattern. And so it starts to cool down my place to comfort with enough time. It doesn't need to say that I'm scheduling that, 4:30, my air conditioning is going to turn on. It senses that based on environmental factors, like my condo right now is reading a temperature of 82 degrees. And so to get from 82 degrees to 72 degrees, it's going to take X amount of hours. And I already know how long that's going to have to take. So I'm now going to start cooling the place at 2 p.m. versus at 4:30 p.m. And that then allows you to really look at energy efficiency in the right way and to be able to use data and predictability to be able to understand how you get to a comfort level that makes sense. So let's go back to the example. So we're cooling the place to comfort. And then what we do is that as I get closer to my garage, it automatically opens because it senses my car coming in, and I get into my condo, locks automatically unlock. My lights start to turn on as I walk into the rooms, or, they start to open up, and my smart, speaker will play soft jazz as I get ready to make dinner. So that's kind of that's a full smart connected experience from a home perspective. I hope that kind of maybe that gives you some relatability as to, when we take that into, the next phase, which is commercial.
Yeah. And obviously a commercial property is, orders of magnitude more complex. You have more people, you have more systems, you have just everything is at scale. So, but, it seems like you still want this technology to make all these experiences for the people in the building more personal and more pleasant and more engaging. So can you walk us through what it's like for someone working in an intelligent commercial building today, and really what's Cohesion's vision for that person in the future as the technology matures and we have more data really to use to customize those experiences?
Great question. And everything that I said on the home example, there are systems collecting all the data of how I'm moving throughout the space, right? It's starting to, if in that example, to get to truly intelligent, as I explained, we have to be able to predict my behaviors, my actions, and that requires patterns of data. So that kind of shifting to your question on the commercial side of it, I'll walk you through kind of two examples. One is the example of a life in the day of a tenant, somebody who occupies and comes to an office in a space. And then next we'll talk about what we're doing for operations, what buildings can expect from an intelligent building and how it makes the building operators or managers' lives much easier as well. So let's say that I wake up, I'm an employee, and my app or an intelligent platform will tell me that it's going to take me 42 minutes with the traffic to get to the building. It, tells me when to leave. So I get to, I do my normal pattern of commute, and then I get to the building. And let's say I'm either riding a scooter, a bike, or a car, or driving a car to the office. Everything behind the scenes is connected in the sense that, and talking to one another. So to enter the garage, I just pull in and the parking garage door opens, because in the background, what's happening is that my credentials are being checked. They're being looked to seeing if I'm supposed to be where I'm supposed to be, if I've paid for the parking itself, if I have a monthly parking credential, if, if I haven't made payment or signed kind of a waiver, it will stop you and say you've got to take some actions before you are able to enter. So you go into the parking garage, and let's say you are driving this day, you park your car, and we are integrated to the elevator system. So over time, the elevator is going to understand that maybe I lollygag for 2-3 minutes in the parking garage before I actually make it to the elevator bank. In the beginning, the elevator would be called, with some level of scheduled aspect to it. So once you hit the call an elevator button in your app, or it would then trigger the elevator cab to come down, or there's some sort of delay. But over time, it says, well, when Justin hits this elevator call button, he's there in 20 seconds. When Thru hits the elevator call button, who knows what she's doing, but it takes her 4.5 minutes to get from her car to the elevator. So that adaptability is all about learning, right? Learning the patterns of what's happening. And it's all the collection of data behind the scenes of, now it's when I enter the garage to when I call that elevator. And so the key components behind all of these actions that people kind of forget about is that it is powered by data. So let's keep going on the journey as you get into the building. So then let's say this building has turnstiles. So we get to the turnstiles, it understands, like through Bluetooth technology or some sort of other kind of technology, you're cleared to go in. Again, behind the scenes, it's saying, Justin's here in the building and he's supposed to be here in the building, but he's only cleared to go to 7 floors within this 40 floor building. And it's making sure that you're supposed to be where you're supposed to be. All of that's happening without you even knowing that it's happening, so that buildings themselves can be safe and secure, because that's at the top of their list, right? That security component is not something that they can shy away from regardless of the geography. They have to, that is the single most important thing to buildings themselves, is the safety and security of the tenants. So then let's say you get to your office suite, which, is, most people don't know this, but it's oftentimes a different system again. So as a building can have somewhere between 14 and 20 different building systems that are, that you interact with on a daily basis that you wouldn't always know, or sometimes because you have different key cards, you have different logins, and you have different things to access that. And so what you end up doing is really just sending the property manager an email, because you don't want to do all of the logins and remember all your passwords. So you get to your office, you seamlessly get through with your mobile app, and you sit down at your desk. And then you're looking for to set up a 20-person meeting later. And so you find and book a meeting room and reserve that space, or you decide that you want to go to the fitness center during the middle of the day. So you reserve a bike, or let's say you want to invite friends to a happy hour on the roof decks, and the amenity is bookable by the building. You book that all through the app. And again, what an intelligent platform is doing is saying, not Justin, but an employee of Cohesion is utilizing space in this manner. And so again, the data that comes from you requesting a use of space is something that we care about, because we're understanding the behaviors and how people care to use space and the demand behind it. So you do that in the app, you invite visitors. And again, the visitor aspect of people coming from a QR like they'll get a QR code, they'll get an entryway into the building. And again, don't have to stop at security and have that experience, and they can seamlessly go through. But it's cleared from a security perspective because you were invited, right? It's a credential that's a one-time use credential, or it could be it could be recurring use, whatever the visitor themselves needs. And then let's say you're sitting in a conference room, and you've got, your 20 people invited to the conference room. And after an hour, your CO2 levels are going up. And either, in the beginning of an intelligent building platform, it reacts to rising pollutant levels. So CO2 in this example, as we give that off as humans. And as the productivity starts to go down, you get a triggered alert from your phone that says, hey, maybe it's time for a coffee. Right? Why don't you order a coffee through the app and get up and go? And really what it's saying is that you're going to get very tired because the CO2 levels are really high in this space. So let's have you leave the room so that the system can actually work behind the scenes and pump air into the space. You don't necessarily need to leave because the systems are going to actually, bring in fresh air to make that environment, comfortable again. And so, and again, same thing with temperature. Let's say the temperature is rising and they'll say, the system can say proactively, here's what you have to do. So there's a lot of comfort level things that are tied to the HVAC system in the building that you could do that's demand responsive or even predictive as you learn from the data that you pull off of the kind of behavior. And then at the end of the day, let's say, you're on your way out and you're juggling 10 things in your hand and all of a sudden you spill something in the lobby and you stain the carpet and you've got, your Diet Coke in hand and you need to put in a service request. You could do that in the app itself. So all of that's kind of a day in the life of the, everyday kind of employee in a building. And, the question is I didn't even realize I was doing all of that, right? Or I just accepted that as okay. But that's not what people are going to expect going back to buildings now. The behaviors have changed. The comfort of the comparison is now to the home versus the comparison to, well, it's better than my last office building kind of thing. So any kind of questions on the tenant flow before I go on to the buildings or operator flow?
No, it's amazing to think about how much data is actually generated by someone just during the day and how much that can be leveraged into making their day better.
Exactly. And it's just, I think people forget that everything that we do, every action that we take in a, million square foot building, there could be anywhere between 3,000, 4,000 people taking actions in a day that you can collect every single one of those actions and understand while still protecting the privacy of the individual human, right? All an intelligent building needs to know or care about is that a human is taking an action and maybe they're connected to this type of company, a tech firm or a law firm or whatever, to try and understand behaviors so that we can better predict and optimize environments. So
how does that make a building manager and operator's job easier? And really, how does a platform like Cohesion's, give them the power to really improve operations?
Yeah, the way that happens is, again, as we just kind of identified, there's so much data from the actions that are happening, but what's not happening from all the tenant side, so that's that human aspect side. Then you look at, well, a building operation is not just humans, it's also systems, right? It's also the infrastructure within the building. So for a manager, building manager, or all the operations staff, whether it be the engineer or the janitorial staff or, the tenant coordination staff, all of that, they need the data to make their operations and their service better and stronger to the tenants of the building, and then deliver better outcomes for the ownership of the building. And so what's needed is a data collection mechanism. So that, we've heard the term digital twin a lot in the industry. It's a growing area of technology. And a digital twin can mean a lot of things. In the sense of what we do at Cohesion is that it's a data warehousing. It collects and connects all the different data sources to the different endpoints. And then we collect the data, we normalize and structure the data, we contextualize that data. And what I mean by that is, let's say there's a sensor in this space. That sensor then gets connected in the digital twin to all the mechanical equipment. So it's connected to this box, to this box, to this light, lighting aspects, to this tenant suite. So we do all of that space domain mapping within our system. So that's what I mean by that context. It's that data is getting the context around it, because you can store that it says 72 degrees, 72 degrees from a thermostat, but then give no context to where that thermostat sits, what it's connected to, and how we can control that thermostat. So all of that's done within that digital twin framework. So from back to kind of the operator staff, what we need to do is that they need to get that data and they need to access that data. And access to that data can come in different forms. You can access it from a raw data form, like so that asset managers, I was in asset management, I liked to play with the data prior to it. So I didn't want curated dashboards. So you can have, folks get raw access. Then you can have the curated dashboards that have different types of insights. You can look and compare different tenants and their behaviors. You can glean insights to leasing front. You can have, any sort of real-time analytics itself. Then the other one is automated building actions, right? And building controls. So that too is something that helps operators, that they're not having to do all these manual tasks, that they're digitizing their tasks themselves. So effectively removing that manual task from their day. And then the next kind of action that we can get from that helps operators is that there's demand-driven actions. So there's automated actions, which are just automated workflow tools. Then there's those demand-driven self-operating systems. So in the context of what I said about the conference room, in the manual sense, somebody would be called up, right? There would be a work order request, or there would be a phone call to the property manager saying, hey, it's really hot in this room. Like, we need you to come and reduce the temperature, right? It's the classic hot cold call. That goes away. So those demand-driven self-operating systems really take a toll off of the operators and improve the experience for everybody in the building, right? So an intelligent platform, again, improves the experience for all building occupants, not just tenants, not just operators. And it provides a lot more data and insights to owners to figure out, how do we improve this, or when do we flip this asset even? And then the last one is that, for operators right now, that's very relevant, is it's really hard to balance a healthy building versus an energy efficient building at this point in time, because, guidance right now says, make sure that you're constantly running your air conditioning or your fans, because that's going to help the movement of air. But if nobody's in the space and pollutants aren't rising and there's nothing to kind of move, then we're wasting a resource. And so that balancing the need and balancing healthy versus efficient is something that really helps the operators as well.
Yeah, so you made it pretty clear that buildings are throwing off data like crazy. So, and you've alluded to a lot of the different data points that are important, both from an experience creation perspective and from an operations perspective. But maybe if you could really systematically walk through kind of what data is available now, and what should a building be measuring today? And then, really, what do we think they're going to need to be measuring next year, or even further out into the future than that?
Great question. I think it's fascinating to know that there's so much, and I've heard this time and time again in the industry, from a lot of the big REITs out there, that there's so much data sitting in these operations. I'm going to sidebar a second here. Again, this was like 14 years ago. So it was 2007. I was managing a portfolio of 400 buildings. And I was an analyst, and I was given the kind of task to say, what is our energy usage across these different, these 400 assets? And we need to really benchmark it to see if we want to buy futures against it to hedge any sort of rising costs. And I was like, how do I do that? Like, where do I go for this? And I could get any sort of consolidated financial information for those 400 buildings. But what I could never get is these operational data points, right? What I had to end up doing, I got to about calling 30 of the property managers or general managers of these buildings. And then I said, this is not really a fruitful project. This is not going to really work. So, I kind of quit. And even to this day, energy has gotten better from energy collection tools. There's energy monitoring tools on the market, but really we don't look at anything else from a portfolio perspective on the operating front. But the data's there. The data's there. The technology's there. It's now that we have to make sure that people understand the power of the data and what they could do with it. So when you look at what's available today, tenant and leasing insights are a big piece that I think is really growing in interest from a lot of the property management firms, the ownership firms, because there's that competition in the market for differentiation, the fight to get people to come back to the office, the need to have engaging spaces so people want to come back, so that people can attract talent again in a real way. That those insights are very, very critical right now. So some of the insights that we can glean from today that we have access to are, what are people doing when they get into the buildings? So what spaces do they use? What, how often do they use it? And is it something that they're using for longer periods of time, or is it quick in and outs? And, which spaces are more utilized than others? And again, who's using it? So then looking at the type of tenant even. So again, if you're collecting data on the type of tenant, so a financial services firm versus consumer packaged goods firm, right? Or a industrial firm, how did the people that work within these act, right? In these spaces? We don't know that. And I can argue that the tenants themselves are really interested in this information too. And they're starting to learn it, and they're starting to care in a big way, because it stems from talent attraction all the way to, how you run buildings. So those insights are starting to become very, very powerful. The next is kind of, how are those tenants being serviced? And we think about service as, in hospitality, you think about service in a very hospitality manner, right? Are they getting, when they call the concierge, are they getting serviced? In an office building, service means that the environments are optimized. The biggest call that engineers get today, well, pre-pandemic, were hot, cold calls. I tend to think that people are going to come back to the office with indoor air quality sensors. And if we're not helping them understand what that means, you're going to see volatility like that. And IAQ and pollutants could be the next hot, cold call. But I hope not, because, pollutants, they tend to be very volatile and all over the place. And it's going to put big stress on engineers if we don't know how to actually optimize that. But, the service level is from that human perspective. So how are, building engineers reacting? How are the hot colds, or the spill that I'd mentioned before? How quickly are the janitorial staff coming to fix that, or to clean up that spill? Those are all service levels that we forget. The office building is also a serviceable asset, right? And so that becomes interesting. How many tickets are people putting in? How many, service tickets are they putting in? How much money are they spending on those service tickets? How much, what is an infrastructure issue that keeps breaking, and how annoying is it? So the elevator maintenance, right? Everyone gets frustrated when one elevator is in service and the 4 others are broken. Those are things that are very frustrating experiences, and can be kind of aggregated into the service levels that people get. And then over time, with more data, we could start to understand, this type of tenant versus this type of tenant, like across the United States or across the world, or, in Class A office buildings versus Class B office buildings, they tend to want this. Again, this is, obviously this is very, very aspirational to start to understand human behavior within these physical infrastructure and built world. The next kind of category is capital budgeting. So again, I kind of made mention to this on the tenant and leasing side, which is, how much is that amenity that I spent $5 to $10 million retrofitting or building out? Is that paying off, right? Was that the right capital decision? Or looking at, here is the aggregation of all the devices in a building, and here's where we're seeing faults, right? This is the end of life for this asset, for this fan power box, or for this, coil, or whatever it is. We start to aggregate that to say, in your budget for next year, here's your capital plan, right? Here are the things on the device aspect that we wouldn't otherwise know until it failed. So you're getting more, where you're getting smarter about what the capital budgeting side is. And all of this is, again, like I said, available today. It's just, we need to harness that data. The next one we've talked at length, which is building health. What are the pollutant levels in the building? As we get smarter, over time, we could start to see where is, what's the wind direction? Where's the wind direction, today, tomorrow? And are we going to see, can we predict then pollutant spikes in the space? And can we get ahead of that before it becomes a problem inside the building? Also, we can track how many surfaces were reduced from a touch point standpoint, so that we could start to see, we're a very healthy building. All of this also is getting reported in new ESG reports. So environmental, social, and governance reporting that real estate firms are doing. that means that, this whole concept of building health has become, top of mind, and it's something that we have to keep track of. I don't, I won't really get into, the COVID side of it, but it's likely here to stay for a while, right? And so we have to learn to live with it. And so these strategies need to be adopted right now. They're not going to be, they take time, they take effort, and they take an understanding and change management practices to get all of this in. And then the other categories of, of data that are, that will continue to grow in strength is sustainability. Obviously, we tend to talk about sustainability mostly from an energy perspective, but as we bring in water utilization, and even waste on the waste side, we're seeing a lot of new technology around both water and waste, and how they affect how the commercial building side of it affects those two categories. So sustainability as a whole is going to continue to be a very, growing and burgeoning industry as well. Ops performance, we've talked about, I won't touch that. And then lastly, what we could do is, through digital twin technology, and as you kind of have that virtual representation of a building, is really risk management tools. So how can you go into how can you understand and how can you model what buildings are? Right now, we don't model the risk. We model financial risk in buildings and commercial operations, but we don't model, sorry, I'm sliding, my camera's sliding. We don't measure the operational risks and the other type of crises like a pandemic. What kind of risk does that pose operationally and financially?
Yeah, so it's an amazing amount of data, and that we'll need to better manage properties, to better create experiences. So I'm thinking back to 3 years ago when Cohesion was spun off from ESD Global. Was there a specific philosophy about data when this idea came about? I mean, about how you should approach data, how best to capture it, how to use it, and I guess really one question: who owns that data?
So that is the question that we get a lot of from our customers and even, our investors, is who owns the data? And, simply put, the clients own the data. The owners of the buildings own their data. We help capture the data. We help them understand the data. We help them, utilize the data to optimize environments and automate things. But the data itself belongs to the owner of the building. And as far as our philosophy, I'll go back to the technology life cycle. The higher up the ladder that you go, the more data matters. So connected buildings use data in the moment. Like, what's that thermostat set to now? How can I raise or lower that setting? Smart buildings begin to collect some of your data, their data over time, and follow patterns. But by the time we start talking about autonomous buildings, the value and use of data is vastly different. It uses much larger data sets and deeper analytics of that through machine learning to move beyond following patterns to either be, suggest better approaches, predictive, or even implement a better approach proactively as things become smarter. So that's really, overall, that's the vision we're working on to deliver every day at Cohesion, is that we are working towards building towards autonomous buildings.
All right, thank you. That's super insightful. We do have some audience questions that come in, so I'll read those to you both now. To our participants, if you have any additional questions, please feel free to drop them in the Q&A box below. All right, let's get started here. Question number 1 is, how are you making buildings green and healthy?
I kind of, I mentioned that before, that as we've seen from guidance, a lot of the ways that to make a building healthy right now, what we want is air to move. We don't want air stagnant in a space. And so we're bringing air into either fresh air or recirculating clean air. We're bringing that into the space, but that obviously brings in and uses a lot more energy. And so understanding how and when pollutants are spiking, being able to predict them ahead of time by understanding how humans use space and environmental factors can help make a building green as well. And so that we're only using it when we're demanding the use of energy. So we're not constantly running fans, but rather what we can do is be very, very balanced about how we look at green and healthy.
Awesome. Next question here that we have is, how do you keep people and their data protected?
But, throughout the presentation, we've talked a lot about, we don't need to know that it's Justin's data. We don't need to track that Justin walked into the building. But what we do know is somebody walked into the building, right? And somebody who worked for Cohesion because they're a tech company. That's what we care about, is that the overall data, right, of what's going on in the building. We don't care about that personal identifiable data. We also, through the architecture of a platform, of whatever platform you use, having certifications like SOC 2 compliance or, other sort of certifications that protect data and the safeguard, the levels of the data that we touch is very important as well. And then also from a physical architecture standpoint, we have to make sure that we're networking. When we think about networking, that we're actually, we're effectively not making something penetrable from a data perspective. So there's a lot more details within that, but it's all about how you think about the overall platform and its architecture and what you think about collecting.
Awesome. Next question here is, do you see a lot of commercial buildings using data to their advantage? How do you think it will help them improve their buildings?
Not to the extent that, obviously I'm going to say this because I think there's a lot of opportunity in this space on data collection. We have seen a lot of interest from operators and owners to understand their buildings in an operational way, because this pandemic, as hard as it's been, has exposed has exposed everybody to the fact that we don't actually know. We can't promise the resiliency of these assets without understanding the underlying data. And so I think that data will be the single biggest advantage to buildings over the next 5 to 10 years, especially as the industry is really shaping up, right? We don't know which way the industry is going to go. Is it going to be 50% utilization of space? I don't believe so. But, overall, there's going to be a lot of change in the industry, and we need data to understand it so that we can be reactive.
Thank you. And then Justin, you're new to the company. What's the single data aspect you're excited to see in the next few years?
Sure. Well, I mean, we've talked about data today and collecting the data. And as these data sets grow larger, and then we apply a machine learning layer to that data, we're going to see experiences that are not just like adaptive to our needs, but proactive. And really, we're going to find ourselves in spaces that maybe know us better than we know ourselves, and can make sure that we're getting what we need even before we know we need it. It reminds me of a quote by Isaac Asimov, where he said, any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. And that's the feeling that I'm most excited about where this technology is going. It can make the world healthier. It can make our lives more engaging and our workspaces more pleasant. So, I'm ready to ride these next few years and watch it all come to fruition.
That's awesome. Well, those are all the questions that have come in. Justin and Thru, thank you so much for providing such informative content. Everyone, that concludes our webinar for today and our whole series. Thank you all so much for attending. We're looking forward to releasing more content like this in the future, so make sure to follow us on LinkedIn, Twitter, and YouTube for our latest updates and content. Thanks again, everyone, and we'll see you soon.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thanks, Justin.